Anyway, let's start at the beginning, Jason. I mean, why did you want to get involved in law?
First of all, can I thank whoever did the Ukraine stuff?
That's Penny.
I think they should have a clap because Hertford for Ukraine, in my view.
Such a pity she's not out here, but well, I'll tell her that.
Sorry, why did I want to get involved in law?
Yeah, that's
That's
it.
a
Yeah.
shit question.
Yeah, I know. That's why you invited me up here.
Because I was born in a shithole and I wanted to get out of there, and it was a job. And I wanted to get a university, and it was the only job that I thought might have some money. Although I wanted to be an archaeologist and did become an archaeologist. But someone offered me a job.
Okay, so why Lawfare, and what the hell is Lawfare? Even all these years after working with you, I don't really fully understand it.
So Lawfare, civil society lawfare, is really an approach to law. You know, we all sort of look at law as though it's a rule-based concept. You know, it's about adhering to rules and blah, blah, blah. But law isn't just about that. It's about being a vehicle for enabling societal change for the better. If law is used correctly, that's what it can do. You know, the people who realized this and how law should work in society was the Romans. If you go back to, like, I don't know, 50 BC, I think it was, and you've got Cicero and Hortensius, and these were the lawyers. They were like rock stars, along with the philosophers. And society realized that to deal with the shit of the day and the chaos of the day, law and rule of law was the way to get around that. And I think that was the starting point in my mind of how you could use law to create added benefit. So it's not just about doing a case and earning some money, you know, with lawyers, ambulance chasers, all of this shit. It's about how do you do law to deal with the problem in the world out there? How can you use a legal system? Maybe not your own, maybe one in Timbuktu, wherever. Or how can you make a new law? How can you bring an action on behalf of victims to actually, you know, change things? And it's a real mindset to get into, because sometimes as a lawyer you get cases and it's a big company and they're offering you loads of money, or a government. And you think, yeah, I'd like to do that, but there's this thing out there, and you go, God, if I can do that, then maybe it'll change something and life is worth living, if you know what I mean. There's something I read when I was a little boy, and it was, do you remember Shelley the poet? Shelley the poet wrote something that is bloody brilliant, and it's called Defense of Poetry. And in the Defense of Poetry talks about how you can write imaginative personal poetry, or you can write imaginative collective poetry. And he said, good poetry is imaginatory collective poetry. It's about for the community, it's about for people. And it stuck in me that if you could go about your legal work not thinking about an individual, just your client or just yourself, then maybe that would be interesting.
Yeah, I had a life after my involvement in Northern Ireland on the wrong side of things, and then I established a human rights organisation. And I remember once at the beginning, the Omagh victims there was no forensic evidence that could convict the bombers or the organisation, and we were looking for a lawyer who was mad enough and stupid enough and brave enough to take a civil action, and Jason had the idea that it was possible, and we found Jason. You want to talk us through a little bit about why the civil action was successful?
Yeah, so a little precursor to that. One of the things is that we as individuals rely too heavily on our governments or on international institutions to do the right thing. They're inherently flawed because they're political by their very nature. And what it means is they can't sometimes do something because they don't have the means to do it. They don't have the structure to be able to deal with a certain situation, or they don't have the political will because, oh, what does a human right of XYZ over their matter because there's an oil deal. And it's a balance, and I get that. You know, let's be pragmatic. But these gaps appear. And in these gaps, it's really important that people here, civil society, fill those gaps and actually drive something. And that's what we've tried to do with our work. And the Omagh case is a good example. Omagh had the most ridiculous situation that you can imagine. 4 people who did the bombing were walking around free in a town with the families of the victims, and they all knew who they were, and there was no prosecution. I mean, can you imagine that? The idea of going to do your Christmas shopping and you see the guy who blew up your kid. So why was it like that? It was like that for 2 reasons. One was that a lot of the evidence the police had was very much intelligence-based, which they couldn't use. And secondly, there was a peace process. And in the peace process, it's not really political, is it? To then start bringing prosecutions against the people who you're trying to ask to put the guns down. But the problem is with peace is if you don't have justice, you'll never have a sustainable peace. There is no instance in history of that happening. So there was a gap there, and this idiot here, me and him were actually in Palermo.
Oh, you're not going to tell that story, Jason?
No, I'm not going to tell that story, no. But we were in Palermo, and we were drunk, and he was going on about this, and I was getting wound up about it, and I said, screw it. I said, we can actually do this and bring a civil case. These families need some justice. We can bring the case, and we can do it. It's not been done before, but let's give it a go. We can only lose, really.
No, I thought you were going to tell a story about when we were there at an anti-mafia conference in 1990, I believe. And then this idiot decided he wanted to go to Corleone, right? And he decided to hire a Mercedes. I'll let him tell the rest of the story. It's really... Neil will get back to the story.
That is absolutely true. But I decided to take in the Mercedes, Henry and another well-known IRA man, and David Trimble, who became First Minister of Northern Ireland.
In one car.
In one car. And my dream was if we went to Corleone and we got there, we could go in a bar and have a chat with the mafia, and they'd be freaked out. And they were. And we were singing IRA and Protestant terrorist songs to them with poor old David Trimble, God bless him, going, this can never be mentioned.
Okay, so back to the serious stuff. Yeah, so I entitled the name of the talk today for Jason, because what Jason does is he takes on the bad guys. That's not him boasting about himself. I named the talk, and I convinced him after some time to come and do the talk. And he has taken on some very bad guys. The most recent one actually paid him a compliment, which is Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, who Jason is suing at the minute, and he did a broadcast across the news to threaten Jason, right? But just give us some kind of clue what price is involved in when you take on the bad guys down the years, and what kind of threats you've and your company have lived through.
Well, it's sort of, it's a sort of, I don't know, an occupational hazard, I suppose, but unintended. I'm not a tough guy, so you don't really want to piss people off. But, I've sued, obviously, the IRA, loyalist groups, but I've done Al-Qaeda, IS, ISIS, Al-Nusra, Abu Nidal, Al-Aqsa Martyrs, Hamas, Hezbollah. I mean, I've done quite a lot. Shabab. Al-Shabaab actually kidnapped me for about 3 hours. I bought.
Yeah, they give it back quickly.
I bought them. They literally threw me out of the room. No shit. That's exactly what happened. So yeah, and I mean, I've done a lot of rogue states as well. I've done Iran, done Revolutionary Guards.
And does it bother you? Like, I mean, there's serious people who would want to kill you and maybe hurt your family. I mean, that must bear on your mind to some degree.
Well, having you as my head of security makes me really feel comfortable. Yeah, so it's all right. But no, I'm sort of I think you work on the basis that if they were coming, hopefully they'll all come and then shoot each other as they're coming for you. But no, I don't think you can look at it like that. I think you've got to say, look, I'm one of a huge team. This is what I believe in, and screw you. Obviously, they're not going to like me or my team. You deal with it. Yes, worked in funny places, really. I mean, I've been shot at, I've been mortar bombed, I've been kidnapped. Worst, being spat on. That I took grave exception to. And also, I was stoned. I got stoned in the Yemen, and that really hurt. And I was trying to do a peace dialogue between two factioning tribes. And I'd gone off, and you shouldn't have gone off, really. And obviously, I don't speak Arabic. And I went to buy a crate of Coca-Cola because my translator had fainted in a yashmak. She was a Beiruti disco girl. She liked clubbing, and she found it too much wearing the hashmash. I don't blame her. And I went to buy the Coca-Cola, and then they ran after me, and they stoned us in the car. But yeah, things like that happen, but they sort of make a good story, really.
So I think it was last March when the Ukraine war kicked off. I thought to myself, I'm going to ring McCue. I'm going to say I've got this brilliant idea. Let's go after the Wagner group. Let's take civil cases. Let's grab the cash for the victims, because the governments are going to take 20, 30 years to get that, and they're never going to see the money. So I rang him up, and I says, Jason, I've got this great idea. And he said, stop. I'm already thinking about it. What are you really thinking about? I'm already thinking about Ukraine. I know what you're going to say. Anyway, maybe you talk us through what you've been doing for this last year and currently what you're up to in terms of the Ukrainian government and suing the Wagner and other people for the victims, and talk a little bit about the victims and what you saw the several times you've been there.
So it ended up with the Ukrainians got in touch and they said, can you create a lawfare program for us? And, I said, yeah, I've been thinking about it, went over there, met with them, and literally on, I think it was the third day, I just said, no, I don't want to do a government lawfare program. I said, what I want to do is the people's. It's going to be much more powerful. The real strength here is, I've been involved in a lot of peace processes, one on the other, and the one thing you see is that real politics gets involved. And when it gets involved for peace, it means the dividend for victims is zero every time. If you're looking for an example, if you look at Iraq war, in the reparations commission there, if you lost your father, the main breadwinner for a family, in the reparations through the government, an international UN scheme, you got $4,600. Now, that isn't going to rebuild your life, right? The most disgusting one, by the way, and this is a good aside, is Agent Orange, the American government, from the Vietnam War. Do you know what the reparations were paid out for victims of Agent Orange? $3 a month. $3. It's insane that was allowed to happen. So I really was trying to explain this to the Ukrainians and saying, look, you're going to be made loads of promises. All this money's going to be frozen. All this is going to be confiscated to you, blah, blah, blah. I said, what you will get is the roads rebuilt, the hospitals, and that's brilliant. The train lines, this is all great, but the people are going to get nothing. They're going to end up with nothing because there just isn't enough money to go around in the community. So I said, what we need to do is to look at the Russian war machine, break it down. It's got billions and billions and billions of dollars of assets around the world, and let's mobilize the people, the real victims in this, which was daunting because there's millions of them, obviously. And I said, let's just bring actions all around the world for billions of dollars and take it and give it back to them, to the victims, rather. And that's sort of the scheme that we've put together now. And the Wagner case is just one of those cases. There's actually 6 in the pipeline ready to go, but many more every day. The drones. You know, Henry's just come back from Ukraine, and from his trip, he was coming back with data on drones, and it got me excited because he was able to, the information he'd got was able to differentiate between a Russian drone and an Iranian drone. Why is that important? Because if I can bring a case against Iran, it's a new pot of money to go after, and I know where there's 100 billion stashed, which we can go after and take, which makes the pot bigger for the Ukraine restitution of their society.
Yeah, and they've got no part in this war. They're sending drones, and I witnessed them in Kyiv 3 a.m. in the morning. Some reason they send them at 3 a.m. in the morning. Well, it's obvious to terrorize the local people, and that's a war crime. And I was in conversation with this with Jason, and Jason says, yeah, that is definitely a war crime. We can do something about that. But the other cases, just talk us through a little bit about the other stuff you're doing with Ukraine and some of the people you met there and what the witness testimony you've taken so far.
We're trying to break it down, obviously geographically. So we've got cases ready to go in Israel, in Canada, America, in several European jurisdictions. And the cases boil down to we're trying to do 2 things. One is get reparations for the victims, Ukrainians, but also be a pain in the arse to Putin, really. Because if we're suing them, they have to deal with it. Because if their money disappears, they've got a problem. You know, this is the point about Russia. Russia is a kleptocracy, and it relies on money to work, else it crumbles. But they've got an Achilles heel. The Achilles heel is they were so corrupt, they don't trust each other. So they didn't keep their money in Russia. They put it outside and gave us a gift. Mostly when we're dealing with a war and we're trying to find assets, we can't get at them because they're in the country that's the problem. These aren't. There are hundreds of billions of dollars of assets all over the world. Europe, I'm not just talking in Caribbean accounts. That's fine. We can target all of that. But it's everywhere. It's in London. It's in Pittsburgh. And so it gives a real opportunity to teach the Russians a lesson, really.
And I mean, some people would say, okay, you get all these hundreds of billions, and just remember some of the statistics here. There are 8 million people fled, refugees fled Ukraine, mostly into Poland. We have many here, and I think there are some refugees here today from Ukraine. And I think it must be heartening for them to hear that other people do care and will pursue the people who are responsible for the torture that they've gone through. But what kind of reassurance, Jason? Because we know that money gets tied up in governments, and 30, 40 years later they go for, and the victims never see it. What kind of reassurance or what kind of security can you build into this to make sure that the actual victims get the money?
Well, I think, I mean, this was very much my discussion with the Ukrainian government. I said, look, go for the international allies and get them to do the international tribunal, the international reparations, and whatever you get, it'll go some way. It's really important. But if you really want to get money for your people, you've got to bring private litigation. And the reason for that is, and I go back to it again, being boring that I am, is because private litigation is immune, absolutely immune to politics. No one can stop. If you bring a case in New York or London on a civil action, no government can stop it. It's the system. We live in a rule of law. It's what's good about our society. And if you rely on international machinery for it, in a peace process, do you think when it comes to peace, Uncle Sam, UK, is not going to say to Zelensky, hey, just hold back on reparations here. We saw what happened to Germany in the First World War in Versailles. We can't allow that to happen. Just go easy. Let's just take that. But the problem is, how is Ukraine going to reconstruct itself? It's devastated. He's seen it. I've seen it. There's probably lots of people here who've seen it. We've seen it on the news. It's devastated. You're talking trillions. but I'm not interested in the roads, right? There's no point in having a new supermarket and a new train if the person, a normal person, anyone like us here, doesn't have £2 to pay for that train or to go into the supermarket to buy the bread. Because that's the issue here. And they're the reparations which will fall through the crack. It is always the victims that fall through the crack.
And what kind of structure do you envisage to make sure, how do you go about paying people? I mean, there's 8 million people and more victims, and infrastructure, homes destroyed. The farmers have been obliterated, and we haven't begun to talk about the mental impact. It turns out that farmers commit suicide more when they lose everything. It's so all of these unintended, hidden stuff. How are you going to make sure or influence that the government just doesn't willy-nilly spend this money? It doesn't go to the victims.
I don't have answers for all of that, in fairness, but that's what I like about private actions. The money that is won through the judgment and recovered goes to the clients, which are the people. It's them. And I've created a structure with them where I said, let's do this, because not everyone has the locus standi, the position to be able to bring an action for one reason or another in different jurisdictions. What we've agreed is, as a Ukrainian victim, you'll get this action free, absolutely free. But what you'll do is give a minimum of 20% of your recovery into a fund which we've set up as a charity with Legacy of War charity in the UK, which we will distribute to other victims who aren't able to have a legal right to bring a case for whatever, there's jurisdictional rules and all this sort of boring stuff. So we're trying to create a way of distributing it. But yes, it's about keeping it away from government structures, because government's priority, and I'm not having a go. Yes, Ukraine is well known to be corrupt, right? Of course it is, but that's not the point here. They're fighting a war here which is much more existential than that. It goes beyond those problems. This is about fighting for rule of law and democracy. There is no question about this. There is no grey area here. That's why we must stand by Ukraine. But at the same time, because I believe in those issues, I can actually say to them in a meeting, and they understand, but you are corrupt bastards, and you've got to change. And they want to change, which is great, and maybe this is their moment. So, that's why I'm conscious that, yes, we want to make sure these are in structures, in international structures for distribution to the people. And it's not an insult to the Ukrainian government. They're doing amazing, but it's being pragmatic.
And you've seen a very bad example, and it must have been soul-destroying for all the years. One other prominent case that Jason's been involved in is the victims of terrorism in Northern Ireland that the Gaddafi supplied the Semtex to, and Tony Blair did a great deal with, who was it, George Bush?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that and the fact that people do get left behind, and a little bit about that, Jason? Thanks.
Yeah, so the history of that is that, oh God, I don't even remember how many years ago it was, but we brought a case for basically all the victims of IRA Semtex, and we brought it against Libya. Why? Because all the Semtex the IRA used, which changed the dynamic in the struggles, completely changed it, was Gaddafi. Gaddafi gave it. And the reason was Gaddafi was doing his asymmetric foreign policy and wanted rivers of blood in England because we had agreed to allow America to have a base here for their bombers, which went over and bombed Benghazi, etc. So this was his revenge. So it was how to get some justice, some compensation for victims in England and Ireland and European and American. And these were victims, by the way, some who had gone for 20 years, and they'd had nothing, no support from the state. Yes, they'd had their medicals done. Yes, they might have had, I don't even know what you call it, but some sort of payout, each month and whatever. But it didn't pay for them to have, like, electrical chair. I mean, it was amazing. We were victims of bombings from Canary Wharf. Would you be surprised to hear that some of them had to pay their own way to go to Thailand for surgery on their faces because the NHS wouldn't cover it, because they thought the British government decided it was plastic surgery. And yet, in this case, these poor people, every time they looked in the mirror every morning, would see the scars on their face and be reminded of the bombing at Baltic or Canary, I can't remember, or the London bus, I forget which one it is now. It was a London bus. So it was 7/7. And these sort of things go on. You hear about them and you realise that we don't value victims enough in society. So, yeah, we brought this case anyway. I'm digressing. And we sued Libya and Gaddafi, and it went on. It went through the courts. We sued them in America. And all of a sudden, the case was stopped. The case was stopped is because Bush had done a rapprochement with Gaddafi. They wanted oil business, Blair the same. And they took about 2 billion of Gaddafi's money and put it into an account and said they had to pay off all the cases against him. And we thought, fantastic, we're going to get money for the victims. And it went through, and my American victims got 10 million each, which changed their lives, able to do it. Nothing for anyone who wasn't America. That was the Bush deal. So all the English victims, all the European, zero. Then we went into a new battle of trying to get British government to change this, to go into Gaddafi. I went to Benghazi 2 weeks after the revolution, got the new government to sign an agreement that the new government to stand against Gaddafi would pay equal damages to the British and European victims. They signed it, and they've never paid it since. And, the government split there and fractured. But more disappointingly, the British government have done nothing. They've never used their power, hard or soft, to say to the Libyans, you've got an agreement with our people who are victims, who you supplied the Semtex to. And it's sort of, those things that are rather galling. So it continues.
And what's galling as well, Jason, I forget what the figure is that the British Exchequer is holding.
Yeah, so the British government have sanctioned of Gaddafi's personal assets 10 billion, which is now 13 billion with the interest the Bank of England has given. And we just keep asking, saying, we need 2 billion for these thousands and thousands of victims to give them parity with what the Americans got through the deal. Give us the interest. Nada. I've been through 5 prime ministers arguing this, promises when they're in opposition, all sides, they're all the same. It's endless. And, these are the sort of things that have to change. These are the gaps I'm talking about where governments have to change. They've got to realise there's certain things which needs to be done for the greater good. These sanctioned assets, there needs to be a regime to make them work for the victims of those regimes who deserve them.
Jason, I know time's cracking on here, but I wanted you just to say a little bit about your case helping the Rohingya people. Let's say a little bit about that, and then we'll...
Well, the Rohingya, was something which had just pissed us all off for ages. It's an amazing thing that we all sit here, and yet there's a group of people, millions, who in a not too far away part of the world, which we used to be very connected with, Burma, have no rights under their constitution. The constitution of Myanmar actually says the Rohingya have no rights and no rights to the courts. There has been a genocide against them, and they're now living in camps in Bangladesh, which, if you go to, don't go before Christmas because it's heartbreaking. It's not good conditions. It's a failing of the international community to give proper welfare to them. And no one stands up for them. There's no Muslim state out there. Where is Saudi Arabia if they're so brave and Muslim and brilliant. Why are they not standing up for the Rohingya, a minority Muslim group being subject to a genocide from mad Buddhists? It makes no sense. So we were trying to work out, how do we, they need a land to live in. How do you do this? No one really cares, I can assure you. There's a few NGOs who have done sterling work, but no one cares. And we thought, we've got to find them some money. And then, hallelujah moment. We were looking at Facebook because my mob, we hate big tech. We think they're the most evil thing. They're up there with Hitler, as far as I'm concerned, the way they abuse our society. And we were looking at Facebook, and we've got them for 4 years. They knew the Myanmar military and the extremist Buddhist monks were orchestrating genocide on their platform, and they did nothing. They were told about it, and they did nothing. And to me, they're liable. And if we have to change laws to do it, we will. And if we can bring that case here, which we've started, if we can manage to scrap through and raise the resource to bring it, because if you can imagine doing this for a million people is quite a big task.
Jason, sorry for interrupting, but how were they doing it across Facebook? How?
Posts. So in Myanmar, there was no internet there. And Facebook came along and decided they could make a load of money. So they started something called Free Basics, which is when you get your phone and you buy it, or your tablet, or whatever the hell it is, you get free Facebook. And so for them, the country went from 1% penetration of the internet, that was it, to 70-something percent in the years that Facebook came in. So the internet was Facebook. So there is no question here of causation. We know from the postings on there, which was go to this Rohingya village tomorrow and slaughter the cockroaches. That's what it said. Facebook knew it was there. And do you know what they've come back on, one of their things? They've said, we had monitors in Dublin. Well, I'm Irish, and I pretty don't know any Irish brothers or sisters of mine who speak Rohingya or Myanmar. It's just rubbish. These tech companies are out of order. So, point being, they've given us a gift. We want to bring in the case. We've been doing it for 3 years. It's going to be a long battle. But if we can get the money, it means the kids can start having proper education in the camp. We can start thinking about a third country to move to for them, where they're coming with money, because no one wants people to come without money, because if you take on 1 million refugees overnight, it's not going to be great for you, right? So that's the game.
Just to say a little bit about the unique organisation that you've helped to set up around Justice Register, the thinking behind that, and why it's unique to help victims.
So here's a wonderful thing. I was talking to my little new friend Ali over there today, and I was explaining that human rights are amazing, but human rights mean nothing if you don't have the human right to access to justice. What's the point of having a piece of paper saying that I have a right to this and that if, one, I can't get into the courts, or two, I can't afford the courts? It is a fallacy in our society which needs to be addressed. And we want to look at how that issue can really be changed, because one of the big issues is that most of the harm, for instance, in the world today, the human rights abuses, the planet abuses, global warming, pollution, is in the global south. All the harm occurs in the global south. The victims are in the global south. Who is doing it? Global north companies or global north actors. But the global south courts have no capacity or capability to represent the rights of the local people, who have no money to bring a case anyway. So we're in this weird thing where you've got people like myself trying to bring cases in the global north courts, for Global South victims against Global North companies because they've nowhere else to go. But it comes down to needing money and jurisdictional pegs.
So one of the unique things about the war in Ukraine and the 8 million people plus who have to have reparations, which is what your company and you are struggling for, one of the unique things is that you pretty much know who everybody is. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of how the Polish registered the victims and how you're going to be able to...
Yeah, so one of the big challenges is being able to give access to justice. That was the point of my blabbering on before. Access to justice is so important. It's central. So what we're doing is Justice Register is a company which is there to try and organise and get give the victims a platform to come to, and it's going to work with the Ukrainian government, the Ministry of Data and Digital Transmission, who have this wonderful app called Dia App. And what it will do is give an opportunity to Ukrainians to be able to digitally sign into the cases, which is really important. So, I mean, we've got, you were asking me, I think, who in Ukraine was helping, were you saying? Or have I
Just, I think the uniqueነስ that you actually know the government are able to bring forward the data.
It's amazing. There's loads of things in a case. What do you need? You need clients, victims, organising them. 2, you need evidence. So we've got, on the evidence, the Ministry of Justice and the Prosecutor General in Ukraine is working and supporting the programme, along with the Ministry of Defence Intelligence. So they're putting all the evidence we need into the cases anywhere around the world, which is fantastic. The way they've embraced that for a society which, let's face it, was communist, which doesn't agree with private sector solutions, civil society solutions rather. They've done amazing things in the last year and totally embraced this, as much as the Digital Transformation Ministry is giving the act to onboard people for access to justice. And the Presidential Office is going to start a crowdfunding campaign for us because we've got no resource. And I mean, literally my firm and the other firms that are working on this pro bono, we can't last forever doing this. We're getting crippled. And certainly when we go in court, we're fighting huge Russian oligarchs, parts of the Russian state, Putin. They're going to have thousands of lawyers against us. And we've got to be resourced, really, else we're fighting with one arm behind our back. So I think it's in September, we're officially launching a crowdfunding globally through the Presidential Office in Kyiv. And hopefully that will get the resource that's needed.
Okay, so one of the things, something you touched on earlier was the fact that the oligarchs were so dumb. And I know this, I was on a trip to Poland with Jason last year, and they told us, well, they've got their yachts, in France, on the coast of here, they've got the houses. So they didn't even trust their own system, as Jason said. They put their vineyards and everything else in the names of their sons and daughters. So you don't have to go too far to look for it. So it's all sitting there. And that's why Jason's campaign is very, very achievable. Now, I know time's marching on, Jason. So I just wanted to ask you, you might not know, but Jason's married to Mariella Fostrop. I wanted to know, Jason, what it's like to live in a house with somebody more famous than you.
She's more terrifying than anyone I've ever sued. And there is no way I'm going up against her. She is a hard-headed woman.
But it must be worrying for your family as well, all seriousness aside, with these, not everybody gets threatened by the head of Wagner every day, so it must be a little bit concerning for them,
Yeah, I mean, one of my problems is I've got loads of mental issues, so I sort of compartmentalise things, and I don't pay enough attention to those issues. But part of the reason why I don't do it is because they're brilliant, and
I've met both your daughter and your son, and Marielle. They're fantastic.
They're really supportive.
Very supportive. Okay, so I think, Jason, unless you've got anything else burning to say, I want to open up the questions. And Jason, thank you very much for that.